Hey guys, tonight we begin with something soft, white, quiet, and honestly much more complicated than you'd expect at this hour. So go ahead, dim the lights, get comfortable, adjust your blanket to that perfect micromillimeter position your brain refuses to negotiate on, and let's drift into a landscape where silence stretches for miles and the morning sun rises like a shy roommate. Tonight, we're heading north, far north, into the lands of the Sami, reindeer herders, snow watchers, storm negotiators, and the kind of people who had several dozen words for snow because, of course they did. If your entire livelihood revolved around small, stubborn hoofed creatures whose motivation levels fluctuated between mildly cooperative and absolutely not, you'd count snow types too. So let's ease into it. Slow breaths. Calm voice. The Arctic is not in a hurry. And neither are we. Let's settle in and begin. The early Sami world moved on rhythms most of us would simply not survive. Dawn didn't so much arrive as it crept up, like a roommate returning from a late shift, apologetic, half-frozen, tapping on the door with a gloved knuckle. Light wasn't guaranteed. Heat wasn't guaranteed. But snow? Snow was the most punctual employee in Northern Europe. For the Sami, especially the herders among them, the landscape was not just a backdrop. It was a giant, shifting, moody personality. Think of it like a very slow-moving celebrity with intense aesthetic preferences. One day, you'd wake to a layer of snow so soft it moved like sifted flour. Another day, you'd get the crunchy, crusted kind that felt like walking across a frozen pie. And then there were the annoying in-between types, just slushy enough to ruin your boots, just firm enough to trip a reindeer who was already having a dramatic morning. Counting these snow types wasn't a fun hobby. It wasn't some quirky form of ice-based journalism. It was survival. Because depending on the snow, the herd might behave, wander, sulk, stampede, collapse dramatically, or refuse to move until offered metaphorical coffee. If you picture reindeer as noble, stoic creatures with majestic antlers and serene expressions, whiz, they can look like that. But the reality is that many of them act like slightly overgrown toddlers in fur coats, easily startled, easily bored, occasionally brilliant, occasionally doing something so baffling that a herder would just blink at the tundra like, right? So that's happening. So, imagine waking at dawn. The air is cold enough to slap. The sky has that pale blue, I'm not fully awake tone. The herd is somewhere out there in the dimness, snorting and stamping, waiting for someone to make decisions. And your first job of the day is to step outside, gaze at the ground, and determine what kind of snow you're dealing with. This was not a casual glance. This was a ritual, a skill, a vocabulary exam delivered by the planet. You'd crouch down, touch it, press it, maybe scoop a little, feel its structure, its mood. Is it sieve, the kind of hard, crusted snow that reindeer could dig through but not easily? Is it sienga, the soft, drift-like snow that seemed to pile itself into miniature sculptures? Is it swolda, thin and ice-coated, a menace to ankles everywhere? Or maybe quoengu, the dense, frozen layer that turned the ground into a permafrost trampoline? And yes, there were many more. Because the Sami didn't just deal with snow. They negotiated with it like diplomats. You'd read the ground like a long, cold, white newspaper with too many editions. It mattered because the reindeer needed grazing, digging nose first through snow to reach lichens buried beneath. Some snow types enabled this. Others trapped scent. Others made the herd skittish. And a few were the meteorological equivalent of a sarcastic eyebrow. Technically manageable, but only if you brought patience. But before we drift deeper into snow classifications, let's float over to another quiet corner of the dawn, the economic crisis that was the average Sami morning. Not crisis in the dramatic sense. More like an ongoing logistical puzzle where everything depended on snow, season, and the slightly chaotic social dynamics of the herd. Because yes, reindeer have social dynamics. And some of them were, frankly, petty. A dominant male might decide that a particular patch of grazing was his preferred spot, because why not double down on territorial energy? A pregnant female might wander off for peace and then immediately demand the herd finds her again. Younger males might spend the morning play fighting in a way that was definitely not productive but looked extremely committed. And all of it was shaped by snow. Too soft, and the reindeer would sink, creating a slow-motion slapstick routine. Too icy, and they'd slip, which they hated with visible passion. Too crusted, and their noses would get scratched during grazing, which, very understandably, made them grumpy. The dawn snow count allowed the herder to predict all of this before the herd even moved. It was like checking the mood of 30 to 200 four-legged coworkers before they'd had breakfast. And, because early Sami society was practical to a degree modern people only pretend to be, the information influenced everything else. Where to guide the herd, whether to travel, whether to wait, whether to adjust gear, sled paths, or clothing. Whether today would be productive grazing day, or reindeer are collectively refusing reality day. Now, let's drift a little sideways and look at why dawn mattered specifically. Snow at dawn behaved differently. The nighttime cold locked it into place. The early light revealed its structure without melting or softening it. If you checked at midday, the sun might change things. Afternoon? Forget it. By evening, you'd have to rely on your morning memory, which, in a northern winter, was basically asking a human brain to do the impossible. Dawn was the truth-telling hour. The clarity hour. The, I know you're tired, but unfortunately the universe wants data hour. Picture a herder stepping out of a tent or a turf hut, wrapped in clothing designed by centuries of trial, error, and frozen toes. Boots stiff from cold. Hair carrying the faint scent of smoke. The world is quiet in that way only Arctic regions can manage. No traffic. No distant train. Just the occasional snort of a reindeer or the muffled crunch of ice shifting underfoot. This is when the snow reveals itself. Its texture. Its density. Its intentions. And yes, people spoken of as primitive by old European writers were doing advanced environmental analysis before breakfast. Because survival tends to make your career options very straightforward. The dawn snow also mirrored social life. Sami families were tightly interwoven in networks of cooperation. Tasks were divided but not rigidly. One person might begin preparing tools. Another would check weather signs. Someone else would handle early meal prep. And the herder doing the snow check would return with information that shaped the day like a quiet manager who absolutely knew what they were doing. And contrary to stereotypes, Sami herding wasn't some lonely individual wandering with a reindeer in a blizzard. It was communal, structured, thought out. You don't survive endless winters by improvising. You survive by knowing exactly how snow behaves when touched by a tired mitten at 6 a.m. Let's also address something that will become a theme tonight: the intense, borderline obsessive human need to classify things. We classify stars, moods, sandwiches, cheese textures. And for the Sami, snow was no exception. But their system wasn't obsessive in a modern taxonomic sense. It was intuitive, based on lived experience. Passed orally, memorized by repetition. Learned not through charts but through dawn after dawn after dawn, until even a child could look at a drift and say, "Yep, that one's trouble." This wasn't just science. It was literacy of the land. And in that world, even small distinctions mattered. One snow type might allow an easy journey. Another might make sled runners drag. Another might disguise cracks in river ice. Another could hint at an incoming thaw, which was basically the Arctic equivalent of your phone battery flashing 2% while you're nowhere near a charger. But counting snow types wasn't purely functional. There was also a quiet aesthetic pleasure in it. Early Sami poets, joik singers, storytellers. Many referenced snow through metaphors, small descriptions layered into songs and tales. Snow wasn't just cold. It had personality, attitude, mood swings. You could practically imagine a storyteller shrugging and saying, "Yes, today's snow is the grumpy kind," while everyone nodded because they knew exactly which one that meant. So why count snow at dawn? Because dawn was honest. Because snow was an unpredictable coworker. And because reindeer were emotionally fragile enough that knowing the ground conditions ahead of time was simply wise. Let's float now to the visual dimension of this world, what it actually looked like. Imagine the horizon smeared in pale pastel colors, pink blending to blue in the faintest gradient, reindeer fur steaming gently as the sun grazes it, icicles clinging to sled frames, smoke rising from a small fire in thin lines that dissipate slowly in the cold air. And all around, snow types layered like geological strata, hard over soft, frost over powder, drift beside crust, a patchwork stitched by the wind. The Sami didn't see monotony, they saw nuance, the way a painter sees shades that most people think are all just blue. To the herders, snow told stories. Where the wind came from, how the temperature shifted, whether the herd slept comfortably or restlessly, whether predators passed during the night, whether today would be a day of calm movement or stubborn reindeer rebellion. And yes, wolves were a factor, but not in the dramatic, chase scene way movies like to show. Wolves were more like quiet competitors who simply observed the same landscape with similar intelligence. The Sami didn't fear them intensely nor romanticize them. They respected them as fellow readers of the snow. If wolves passed, the tracks told their own tale. Another reason to know the snow structure, because some snow captured prints clearly, while others erased them instantly. But let's glide back to our morning ritual. The herder finishes inspecting the snow, stands, breathes slowly, watching the air fog, looks toward the herd, makes a decision. Maybe they'll move east today, where the snow is softer, easier for grazing. Or maybe they'll stay put, knowing the crusted top layer will warm and soften by midday. Maybe they'll take a shorter route to avoid a patch of dense wind-packed snow that the reindeer hate walking through, because of course they do. All of this shaped daily existence. One snow type could mean an efficient day. Another could mean delays. Another could signal potential storms. Another might just make everyone slightly cranky. You can almost hear a herder muttering, "Great, that kind of snow," in a tone that feels universal across cultures. But there's something surprisingly tender about the whole process. The relationship between herder and herd wasn't strict. It wasn't command and obey. It was more like an ongoing conversation where both sides had opinions, and the snow had the final word. And this is why dawn mattered. Before voices rose. Before the wind changed. Before the reindeer stirred the ground with hooves and noses. Before the day's warmth softened the top layers. The dawn's snow had its verdict. And once that verdict settled into the mind of the herder, the next step unfolded with the same slow inevitability as northern daylight. No greetings now. No warm-up. Just moving directly into the long rhythm of the Sami world, where reindeer migration was as natural as breathing and as predictable as unpredictability could ever be. Migration wasn't dramatic. It didn't surge. It drifted. Much like the snow itself. People sometimes imagine nomadic life as one long, dusty caravan moving towards some cinematic horizon. The Sami version was more like shifting in your sleep. A little here, a little there. Never rushed. Never reckless. Always listening to the land, which had a habit of being quietly opinionated. Seasonal movement followed patterns older than memory. The herd wasn't forced across the tundra. It simply went where the conditions whispered, and the herder followed, sometimes guiding, sometimes negotiating, sometimes just raising an eyebrow at a particularly stubborn reindeer who insisted that a patch of terrible snow was actually perfect. Thank you very much. Much of this came back to snow types. Snow was not passive. It instructed. The Sami had no need for compasses or maps. Their map lay beneath their boots, changing texture with each hour. Hard snow in winter months meant stable travel. Powdery drifts indicated wind paths. Dense granular layers hinted at earlier thaws. All of this mattered for migration, because a reindeer herd did not care for scenic detours. They cared for food, footing, and the avoidance of unnecessary drama. And drama occurred, quietly but consistently. A dominant bull might decide he was the embodiment of seasonal confidence and lead the herd north too soon. A young calf might wander off to investigate a patch of snow that looked interesting for reasons only known to baby reindeer. The herder would observe, adjust, and, if necessary, intervene not with shouting, but with the resigned patience of someone who had seen this pattern a few thousand times. Migration also meant gear. Sleds, harnesses, tools, all adapted to the changing snow structure. A sled that glided beautifully on compact, icy snow would drag like a stubborn mule on softer types. The herder knew this before leaving camp. That morning's snow reading? It wasn't just for the herd, it was for the people too. If the snow was vaca, light and soft, sled travel became a gentle exercise in resignation. If it was bivla, wind-packed, travel was smooth, but stopping required planning unless you wanted to slide gracefully past your intended destination. All of this folded seamlessly into the quiet pace of the day. No rush, no urgency, just the calm understanding that time flowed differently here. The land did not care for schedules or human preference. You moved with it or not at all. Let's drift for a moment into the social structure that surrounded migration. Families traveled together. Extended networks maintained seasonal routes. Real estate was not a matter of fences or titles, but tradition and shared memory. If your family used a valley for winter grazing, you didn't own it. You respected it. You returned to it. You understood its snow patterns and wind habits the way one might understand the quirks of a familiar old friend. The communities themselves were built on quiet cooperation, not dramatic teamwork, just steady, predictable support. Someone prepared food. Someone adjusted harnesses. Someone repaired sled runners. Someone checked the sky for signs of snow on the way. Though honestly, predicting snow in the Arctic was like predicting that water would be wet. The real question was what kind of snow would arrive. Every individual played a role, even the elders who no longer herded actively. They might sit at the edge of camp, wrapped in skins, nodding at the snow in a manner implying they had thoughts about its texture. Elders had a lifetime of data stored in memory. If they said a certain crust meant an early thaw, people listened. Most of the time, they were right. If they were wrong, they blamed the wind, which was fair enough. Speaking of wind, it rearranged the snow with impressive creativity. One gust could turn a smooth surface into a ridge. A long night of steady blowing could mix layers, transforming one snow type into another. This constant shift reinforced the need for the dawn check. Snow was a shapeshifter. If left unattended, it would rewrite the landscape with artistic but inconvenient flair. During migration, the herder observed everything: how the herd walked, where hooves sank, how calves lifted their legs, whether the snow carried sound differently, whether the wind hummed through trees or over bare land. The Sami weren't just moving, they were reading, continuously. Now, let's float toward the herder's reputation for patience. Reindeer do not move quickly unless they have a strong reason, like predators, loud noises, or a collective burst of chaotic energy. Most of the time, they ambled at a speed that suggested they were considering philosophical questions. The herder walked behind or beside them, matching their pace, adjusting gently. There was no need to push them hard. Reindeer, much like certain distant relatives, do not respond positively to being rushed. Snow shape influenced speed. Soft snow meant slower steps. Icy layers meant careful footing. Deep drifts meant periodic complaints from the herd in the form of snorts and exaggerated leg lifts. The herder accepted this, not with enthusiasm, but with the resignation of a person who understood that arguing with nature was pointless. Let's glide deeper into the winter season, when migration mattered most. Winter snow was layered like a cake assembled by someone who had strong opinions about texture. The bottom layer might be early season powder turned dense by weeks of pressure. Above that, icy sheets formed after thaws. Above that, drifting snow fell into gentle shapes. Above that, fresh powder from the previous night. The herd knew how to dig through it. They used their hooves, their noses, their instincts. But some layers were nearly impossible to break. If the dawn snow check revealed a hard, icy crust, goavi, the herder prepared for a difficult day. Reindeer hated digging through it. Noses scraped. Hooves slipped. Tempers rose slightly, which in reindeer terms meant more grunting and less cooperation. This could change the route entirely. A herder might avoid a slope where crusted snow accumulated, or lead the herd through a valley where wind-scoured surfaces made grazing easier, or linger near birch forests where snow stayed softer under the canopy. Everything became a negotiation between snow and survival. Now, let's drift sideways for a moment, into the small but memorable personality traits of reindeer. Some reindeer were leaders, confident, always in front. Others followed but did so skeptically, like middle managers not fully convinced by corporate strategy. A few were wanderers, drifting off just enough to cause mild concern but not enough to cause real trouble. And then there were the particularly stubborn ones, who insisted on standing in one spot for no reason anyone could discern. Every herder knew the individuals in the herd, and snow helped explain their moods. A bull standing alone on a patch of hard snow? He wasn't contemplating the meaning of life. He was probably annoyed. A calf stepping high through soft powder looked playful but might be growing tired. A female sniffing the crusted layers might be assessing grazing effort for her unborn calf. This was all part of the daily calculus. Let's move now to the herd's relationship with the landscape. Reindeer didn't just move, they remembered. Seasonal paths repeated for generations because the herd recognized certain valleys, lakes, and forest lines. And the herder trusted the herd's instincts as much as the herd trusted the herder's knowledge of snow. It was a quiet collaboration. No drama, no shouting, just coexistence shaped by centuries of practice. Sometimes, migration meant crossing frozen lakes. This required even more snow literacy. Too little snow meant slippery ice, dangerous. Too much snow could hide thin patches. The safest crossings often had a specific kind of wind-blown layer that signaled strong ice beneath. A herder stepping onto a frozen lake wasn't fearless. They were informed. Snow revealed thickness. Ice revealed tone when struck. Reindeer revealed hesitation or comfort based on instinct. If everything aligned, the crossing was smooth. If not, another route was found. The land always offered alternatives, but only to those who understood its language. As winter deepened, migration slowed. Not stopped, just shifted into an even calmer rhythm. Days shortened. Temperatures dropped. Snow layers compacted with the weight of long darkness. This made the dawn snow check even more important. Ice layers thickened. Powder turned to crust. Old tracks vanished. New patterns formed under the moonlight. Some mornings, the snow was so cold and dry it squeaked underfoot. Other days, warmer air created a thin melt layer that froze again overnight. Each shift changed the herd's behavior, and the herder adjusted with the same gentle resignation found everywhere in this landscape. Quiet consistency defined Sami migration. Not haste, not chaos. Just slow movement guided by snow, instinct, memory, and the unhurried passing of time. Life around the herding camp settled into a rhythm so steady it could lull even the most restless mind. Nothing loud, nothing sudden, just quiet tasks moving along at their own slow pace, shaped, as always, by weather, light, and whatever mood the reindeer collectively decided to adopt that week. Daily life wasn't rushed. There was no grand drama of, the herd must move now. It was more like, the herd might consider moving after breakfast, depending on the snow, the wind, and whether the calves decide to stop walking in circles. And in the middle of all this, the people. Every Sami herder lived inside layers of routine that folded into each other like soft snowdrifts. These weren't rigid rituals, but steady habits, practical, familiar, comforting. Morning tasks happened quietly. The fire was coaxed from embers. A pot warmed slowly. Boots softened by heat were pulled on with small sighs. Someone would shake loose snow from a sled runner, not urgently, but with the slightly resigned energy of a person who knew they would be doing the same thing tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. Inside the tent or turf hut, the warmth gathered slowly. Reindeer skins lined the floor. Tools hung in predictable places. Smoke drifted toward the vent in the roof, curling lazily, as if even the smoke refused to hurry in the Arctic dawn. Household routines were shaped by the migration cycle. In winter camps, tasks centered around staying warm, maintaining gear, and tending to the herd's needs. In spring and summer, they shifted toward preparing for longer migrations, mending clothing, and processing whatever resources the land offered. But regardless of season, one thing stayed constant: the slow precision of everyday work. Let's drift into the domestic details for a moment. Those quiet routines so ordinary that historians often overlook them but that actually shaped the texture of Sami life. Clothing maintenance, for instance, was no small matter. Every seam mattered. Every layer of fur had a purpose. A tiny tear left untreated could turn into a drafty disaster during a blizzard. Thread was pulled carefully. Hide was softened with practiced hands. Boots were stuffed with dry grasses chosen for insulation. Everything was functional, but also beautiful in its own minimalist way. These small tasks were usually done sitting close to the fire, where the heat reached gently but steadily. Someone might hum a short melody, a joik soft enough to blend with the crackling wood. Children, wrapped in furs, would play nearby with small carved toys shaped like reindeer or sleds. The toys were not elaborate, but they carried the shape of a world that was familiar and intimate. This domestic sphere also included food preparation. Meals weren't rushed. They simmered. They warmed slowly. A stew might sit on the fire for hours, ingredients blending into something hearty enough to endure the cold. Food wasn't about indulgence. It was about energy, warmth, stability, the quiet satisfaction of a full pot shared among family. And always, beneath these routines, was the presence of the herd, never far from mind. A herder didn't clock out. They remained attuned to sound, movement, and weather. A distant snort might prompt a glance outside. A shift in the wind might mean checking the snow again. Even in the warmest part of the day, the herd stayed close as a constant background presence, like a soft soundtrack of hooves crunching or bells jingling faintly. Let's move now into rituals and beliefs, those subtle threads woven through everyday life. The Sami didn't separate the practical from the spiritual the way modern people might. The land wasn't just scenery. It had agency, presence, personality. You didn't fear it, but you respected it, because ignoring nature's preferences was a fast route to a very cold, very uncomfortable lesson. Sacred sites dotted the landscape, usually marked by stones or distinctive natural forms. They weren't elaborate temples, more like quiet reminders. Here the world feels different, tread gently. Reindeer themselves held spiritual significance, not in a dramatic mythological way, but in a quiet, everyday reverence. They were providers, food, clothing, tools, mobility, but also companions, individuals with quirks, personalities the herders came to know almost as well as their own relatives. Naming a reindeer wasn't mandatory, but many did it anyway. Names referenced antler shapes, gait, color, or temperament. A reindeer with a perpetually unimpressed expression might earn a name that loosely translated to the one who disapproves. Another with a habit of wandering might be called something equivalent to roamer. These weren't sentimental choices. They were functional. Names helped track individuals, especially important during migrations or calving season, when keeping everyone together required steady awareness. And snow types were part of these identities. Some reindeer handled deep powder effortlessly, stepping lightly as if performing an extended improvisational dance. Others stumbled dramatically through crusted snow, as if personally offended by the terrain. Herders noticed these patterns, adjusted expectations, planned routes accordingly. Let's drift into relationships now, the gentle, practical bonds between people. Family structures were flexible. Roles shifted. Knowledge was shared. Young people learned slowly, not through formal lessons but through observation. A child might spend winter watching adults check snow, listening to explanations whispered in the early dawn. By adolescence, they understood the difference between snow that supported hooves and snow that swallowed them whole. Marriage and partnership also fit into this slow, steady rhythm. There was affection, but not the dramatic, poetic romance found in courtly literature of Southern Europe. Love here was built on cooperation, reliability, the ability to keep a fire going, repair a sled, handle a reindeer without causing chaos, and wake at dawn without being impossible to deal with. Nothing flashy, just steady companionship in a world where every task mattered. Let's glide into the sensory environment of the camp. Sounds were subtle. Wind brushing against fabric, hooves shifting outside, a kettle bubbling gently, the muted squeak of cold snow. Light was equally gentle, diffuse, so filtered through reindeer hides or the tent's opening. Smells blended into a familiar profile: smoke, cold air, moss, dried fish or meat, the faint sweetness of birch bark. All of these small sensory details formed the emotional landscape of Sami life. And through all of it, counting snow types remained a quiet thread. It was practical, but it was also symbolic. A reminder that understanding the world required patience, attention, respect for subtlety. Snow wasn't an obstacle. It was a language, a conversation between human, reindeer, and landscape. Now let's drift sideways into the sleeping arrangements of the herding camps. Nights were long in the Arctic, longer than any modern person with a 9-to-5 schedule would tolerate. Inside the lavu, the Sami tent, people slept close to each other, not out of sentimentality but practicality. Shared warmth was efficient, intentional, a quiet expression of interdependence. The ground was covered in layers of hides. Children slept wrapped tightly, cocoon-like. Adults shifted positions slowly, mindful of not letting cold air seep into the bedding. Outside, the herd settled too, curling, standing, breathing in soft puffs into the cold night. And throughout the darkness, snow continued its transformations. Wind shaped it, cold hardened it. A thin layer of frost might form on top, changing the morning classification entirely. This meant that daily life had no beginning or end, just cycles. Snow melting into snow, forming into snow, shifting. People adapting, herd adapting, everyone negotiating with a landscape that preferred calm persistence. Let's drift into emotional dynamics for a moment. Not dramatic emotions, but the gentle ones. Herders carried a quiet pride. Not boastful, just steady confidence built from surviving winters and reading landscapes others would call empty. They valued calmness, resourcefulness, the ability to look at a problem, broken sled runner, stubborn reindeer, changing snow, and solve it without fuss. Anger was counterproductive. Frustration wasted energy. Patience kept you alive. Families joked softly, teased each other about small mistakes, like misidentifying a snow type or tripping in a drift. Humor was subtle, often dry, sometimes bordering on sarcastic in the calmest possible way. Reindeer were frequent subjects of this humor, especially the stubborn ones, which was most of them. And through these interactions, identity formed. Being a herder wasn't a job. It was a state of being, a relationship with snow, land, animals, ancestors, and community. Every dawn snow check reinforced that identity. Every migration step carried it forward. If you've made it all the way to Chapter 4, first of all, congratulations. Or condolences. Hard to say. But here we are, drifting gently into that familiar late-night territory where ancient people do mildly interesting things for incredibly long periods of time, and we pretend that's exactly the kind of soothing content we needed. Tonight's delightfully uneventful topic: how an entire community could spend several generations perfecting a process that, frankly, looks like the world's slowest group project. And naturally, because history insists on being adorable, every elder, apprentice, neighbor, cousin, in-law, and absolutely non-asked-you bystander had their own very important opinion on how things should be done. Of course they did. Humans have been giving unsolicited advice since approximately 5 minutes after we evolved thumbs. The real charm of this chapter, though, is the rhythm. Daily routines, repeated so consistently across centuries that they become almost hypnotic. Picture it: someone grinding pigments at dawn. Someone else tying together fibers with the kind of patience only achievable by people who didn't have social media. A small cluster of folks arguing about airflow as if ventilation were a moral philosophy. And somewhere in the background, a master craftsman muttering about how apprentices just don't measure angles like they used to. Classic. But beneath the pleasant monotony, there's a heartbeat, an intentional calmness woven through the village's work. Even the mistakes become part of the story. A misaligned beam here, a crooked knot there, instantly forgiven and immediately converted into folklore, because that's how old communities roll. If something went wrong, you shrugged, blamed the wind, and moved on. And honestly, that's the mood. slow, steady, unbothered, the historical equivalent of a long exhale. By chapter 5, our ancient community has fully committed to its favorite pastime, doing ordinary tasks with extraordinary seriousness. And honestly, it's charming. This is the chapter where everyone leans into the deep, soothing logic that only exists in societies without alarms, deadlines, or the crushing realization that your messages are seen but not replied to. The people here operated by a simple principle: if something was worth doing, it was worth doing slowly. Painfully slowly. Heroically slowly. And so the rhythm of the day unfolded like a lullaby. At sunrise, someone, usually the person who naturally wakes up early, because of course they do, started the morning chores with the calm determination of a monk who has already accepted that the universe will unfold at whatever pace it feels like. They stirred the first pots, swept the first corners, and whispered a few notes of some old song that nobody fully remembered but everybody hummed anyway. Then the mid-morning crowd shuffled in. These were the specialists, the craft keepers, the "don't talk to me until I've had my morning air" types. They adjusted tools, straightened bundles of material, and inspected everything with the same expression scholars use when reviewing a lost manuscript. A little awe, a little pride, and a hint of "who moved my stuff?" By midday, the entire workspace moved into what historians affectionately call collective mild productivity. Not fast, not slow, just steady. Someone cut fibers. Someone soaked them. Someone counted bundles because counting bundles is apparently harder than it looks. A few people argued over whether a procedure should take 6 minutes or 7, and the elders declared, very wisely, that both answers were correct if you believed in yourself. And throughout it all, there was the hum of collaboration. The soft shuffle of sandals across packed earth. The quiet splash of water. The hushed tapping of tools. Nothing loud. Nothing abrupt. Everything holding the same gentle tempo, like an orchestra warming up for a symphony that will never actually begin but is still pleasant to listen to. As the sun dipped toward evening, the pace slowed even more. People finished up tasks whenever it felt right. Not at a specific moment, just at that intuitive time when the shadows stretched long enough to signal, "All right, that's enough for today." A communal exhale drifted through the space. Tools were laid down. Materials were covered. Stories began. This is the chapter where routines became rituals, and rituals became memories, and memories turned into the soft stories elders told to lull children to sleep. The kind of stories that weren't supposed to be exciting, just comforting, predictable, steady. Dawn arrived again, soft and pale, gliding across the landscape with the kind of slow confidence only northern light can muster. There was no rush to it, no dramatic burst, just a quiet suggestion that it might be time to get up, if anyone felt like it. And, predictably, someone always did. There's always one person who rises just slightly too early, the unofficial village lighthouse, blinking into the cold morning with the resigned patience of someone who has accepted their fate as the designated starter of things. This chapter drifts into the morning routine of the people who lived in these long-ago settlements. People who understood the value of doing the same tasks at the same time with the same expression every single day. Not because they lacked creativity, not because they feared change, just because rhythm was its own kind of wisdom. The first sounds of the day were rarely words. They were more like small, domestic sighs. A pot shifting, a door skin brushing against its wooden frame. A breath that said, "Okay, here we go again." Someone poked at the embers of last night's fire, coaxing a glow back into usefulness, like trying to motivate a friend who simply isn't a morning person anymore. The fire responded slowly, because everything responded slowly out here. By the time the sky settled into its pale blue mid-morning quiet, people had begun to gather. Not in a bustling, energetic way, more like quiet stones rolling together in a gentle stream. Tasks resumed with the same soft determination as always. Someone ground grain. Someone straightened a line of drying materials, nudging them as tenderly as if they were children who needed encouragement. Someone checked a set of tools for cracks, even though the tools rarely cracked. But checking made life feel orderly, and orderly meant peaceful. Conversations were minimal. Not absent, just quiet, like verbal embroidery stitched at the edges of the day. Someone might murmur about how the frost looked a little thicker today. Someone else might mention, in a tone barely above a whisper, that they dreamed of a walking reindeer last night. This comment would prompt a few slow nods, because dreams were community property, strange little visitors that belonged to everyone. At midday, the light softened even further, flattening across the ground in that gentle northern way that manages to make everything look like a watercolor someone spilled a little water on. People took advantage of the calm. Work settled into its familiar half-pace, a speed that historians, if we are being honest, envy deeply. There's something soothing about a society that refuses to be hurried. Tasks continued in simple cycles. Checking, smoothing, preparing, adjusting. Nothing frantic. Nothing inefficient either. Just steady care. A child wandered through now and then, holding something that was definitely not a toy but had temporarily become one. No one corrected them. The small chaos of children was treated with the same affectionate tolerance as an occasional gust of wind, momentary, harmless, and a reminder that life didn't have to be perfect to be peaceful. As the day inched toward evening, the level of productivity tapered naturally, like a candle burning down to its last comfortable inch. No signals were needed, no announcements. People simply slowed, because slowing was woven into the bones of the land. A few final tasks were finished, then hands rested on knees, or on tools, or on nothing at all. There was always a moment, right before dinner smells drifted out, when the entire space seemed to hold its breath in quiet satisfaction. Another day completed. Another set of familiar motions followed. Another thread in an endless, soothing pattern. Nothing astounding happened. No crises. No revelations. Just the steady pulse of life lived gently, with a devotion to the small rituals that make time feel soft. By the time we drift into Chapter 7, the pattern of daily life has settled into a kind of gentle geometric repetition. Not rigid geometry, nothing with sharp corners. More like rounded shapes, the sort you could trace with your fingertip without ever lifting it from the surface. Life moved in circles here. Slow, looping circles. And no one seemed particularly interested in straightening them out. The morning began, not with a call, not with a command, but with a subtle rearranging of sounds. The distant cough of someone stepping outside. The muffled thump of a tool being set down. A stretch, a yawn, a shuffle of boots against firm earth. These were the village's morning bells, rung softly by whichever pair of lungs and limbs happened to wake first. Inside one of the homes, an elder warmed their hands near the rekindled fire, rotating them with the solemn focus of someone turning a sacred artifact. Outside, someone tightened a binding that didn't need tightening. Another person brushed away a thin film of frost from a storage lid. Not because it mattered much, but because brushing frost off things was just what you did. It made the world feel tended. The tasks today were the same as yesterday, and would be the same tomorrow, and there was a quiet wisdom in that. Most modern people hear routine and think of boredom. But here, routine was a soft blanket draped across the hours. Predictability was a kindness. No one needed to guess where they should be or what they should do. The day unfolded like a familiar story told by someone who always hits the same beats, in the same order, with the same pauses, and somehow it never stops feeling comforting. Mid-morning brought the workers outside in a slow-motion drift, like a flock of birds deciding, collectively and without discussion, that it was time to move. Tools were gathered. Materials checked. Work resumed at a speed that would make even the calmest modern yoga instructor say, "Okay, but maybe just a tiny bit faster?" People measured lengths, smoothed surfaces, adjusted bundles, rearranged objects that were technically already fine. A philosopher might call this a meditation on presence. A practical person might call it very careful fiddling. Both would be correct. Occasionally, someone paused to stare at the horizon, as if checking to make sure it was still there. It always was looking exactly like it looked yesterday. No surprises. No sudden drama. Just a steady line drawn across the world, doing its job. Children wandered underfoot again. contributing a gentle chaos the adults carefully worked around, like stepping around small puddles. One child discovered that tapping two stones together made a pleasant clacking sound and proceeded to become a one-person percussion section. No one stopped them. It added ambience, which this place had already mastered. Around midday, the sun softened into its usual muted glow, washing the entire settlement in a color that can only be described as pale oatmeal with aspirations. People adjusted their pace accordingly, though their pace was not exactly fast to begin with. If anything, they slowed, the way someone might slow when savoring the last warm minutes of a long bath. Tasks continued. Lines were checked for straightness that didn't actually matter. Items were sorted into groups that only made sense to the people sorting them. Someone rediscovered a tool they had misplaced earlier, declared a soft "ah," and placed it exactly 3 inches to the left of where it had been. The elders drifted from person to person like wandering clouds, offering short comments that blended advice, memory, and mild weather observations. It was colder last year, they might say. Or, this one is a little crooked, but that's fine. People are crooked too. The younger listeners nodded, not because they understood the philosophical point, but because nodding was the easiest way to keep the day smooth. As the afternoon eased into evening, people slowly wound down. A few final chores were wrapped up with the kind of care usually reserved for completing a complicated puzzle. Someone tied off a bundle. Someone covered a storage basket. Someone brushed a thin dusting of snow from a pathway that would, impossibly, be covered again within the hour. But keeping up appearances mattered. The sun dipped so gradually that no one could say when it officially set. It just disappeared from the visible part of the world, leaving behind a gentle blue-gray hush. Conversations became quieter still. Movement softer. The entire settlement seemed to fold itself inward, like a book being closed for the night. By the time we settle into Chapter 8, the days have become so similar that even the concept of yesterday feels optional. Time doesn't move here. It drifts, the way snowflakes drift when the wind can't quite decide what it wants. Nothing is rushed. Nothing is sharply defined. Even the seasons seem to approach with a sort of polite hesitation, as if knocking first to avoid startling anyone. The morning once again begins in quiet layers. Not all at once, but gently, like a curtain being lifted by someone who doesn't want to wake the whole room. A thin thread of firelight flickers in one home. A soft huff of breath escapes someone stepping into the cold. There's the faint rhythm of someone sweeping snow, not because the path must be cleared, but because the act itself feels anchoring. It's movement with no urgency, purpose without pressure. Inside another dwelling, someone rearranges a handful of items for no reason beyond the pleasant sense of order it gives. A bowl goes here instead of there. A set of tools is placed in a line that looks, somehow, calmer. Life here wasn't about efficiency. If anything, efficiency would have felt rude. By mid-morning, the quiet hum of work has begun again. That hum isn't literal, no machines, of course, but it feels like one anyway. A consistent tempo. A shared rhythm. People drift in and out of view, moving slowly enough that even their shadows seem thoughtful. One person checks a structure's support posts, pressing their palms gently against the wood. They nod once, satisfied. Another person smooths a surface that is already smooth, but perhaps not smooth enough for their internal standards. Someone nearby sorts materials by size, creating rows so tidy they would impress even the most dedicated modern stationery enthusiast. And all around, the sounds are soft, brushing, shifting, quiet exhaling. Nobody here needs direction. Nobody needs a schedule. The tasks guide themselves, appearing at the edge of vision like old friends. Everything gets done, eventually, but only at the pace that feels natural. Children wander again, because children always wander. One carries a small bundle of twigs, holding it like a priceless treasure. Another traces shapes in the snow, absolutely convinced these shapes are meaningful, and honestly, the adults treat them as if they might be. Someone pauses to admire the child's lines and murmurs something supportive, the equivalent of saying, "Excellent work on your enigmatic snow symbol dissertation." The sunlight, diffused through a pale sky, gives everything a dreamlike softness. It's a light that doesn't cast strong shadows. It just settles evenly, making all movement feel like part of a slow, continuous story told without punctuation. By midday, the settlement leans into its habitual calm. People return to the same places they always return to. Someone kneels beside a piece of equipment and adjusts it by a fraction that no outsider would detect. Another person relaces a binding with the serene concentration of someone performing ritual embroidery. Nothing loud, nothing hurried, just the soft geometry of care repeated for the 1000th time. Occasionally, a faint breeze lifts a few strands of hair or a corner of a cloth, but even the wind behaves respectfully here. It never arrives with force, never interrupts. It drifts through like a polite visitor, lightly inspecting things and moving on. In the early afternoon, a few elders gather near the warmth of a fire. They sit in the kind of silence that isn't empty at all. Silence as communication, silence as comfort. One of them eventually speaks, offering a line of memory that trails off before reaching any firm point. No one minds. Firm points aren't required. The others nod in slow agreement, savoring the rhythm rather than the meaning. Work gradually tapers as the light dims. Tools are put away with a reverence that suggests each one has a small spirit inside it. Materials are covered softly. Footprints mark the day's wandering paths, then blur as new snow drifts across them. The air cools, the colors soften, and the settlement seems to exhale again, its breath rising in gentle clouds. The first person to wake today did so with the same slow awareness as always, blinking at the ceiling as if politely asking it whether it was truly morning or simply thinking about becoming morning. The light creeping into the room didn't answer. Northern light rarely bothers with clear statements, but it offered a tentative glow that was close enough. Someone stirred the embers again. Someone stretched their legs. Someone breathed deeply, the way people do when greeting cold air that has crept in overnight. These sounds blended into the same gentle overture the settlement had heard for years, the hum of existence continuing at its own steady pace. Outside, the snow had formed soft ridges along the edges of paths. Not enough to block anything, just enough to need brushing. And of course, brushing snow was one of those universal tasks that everyone did instinctively. A quiet sweep across a wooden boardwalk, a gentle flick of the wrist along a doorway. Little motions that served no urgent purpose but made the morning feel cared for. People emerged gradually, forming a slow-moving cluster of silhouettes. There was no gathering point, no official meeting. Just a collection of individuals drifting toward their daily work areas in the same calm way water finds its level. Someone picked up a tool they'd used for decades, its handle dark from constant touch. They tested its weight, even though it had never once surprised them. Another person checked bindings, pressing each knot with mild curiosity, as if these knots might one day have secret opinions. Someone else examined a piece of equipment with the kind of focus modern people reserve for reading expiration dates. Little motions, little checks, little reassurances that the world was still in order. A distant thumping sound announced that one of the younger people had decided to rearrange a pile of wood in a pattern only they understood. They worked with intense seriousness, pausing occasionally to judge their own progress. An elder walked by, took in the sight, nodded sagely, as elders excel at doing, and continued on. No one questioned the arrangement. No one needed to. Creativity here was harmless and even welcomed, provided it stayed quiet. Children continued their usual slow meandering. One child discovered a patch of ice that had formed a tiny bubble underneath. They pressed a mittened hand against it repeatedly, fascinated by the way the air pocket shivered. Two adults watched from a distance, discussing whether they remembered seeing a similar bubble last winter, and concluding that maybe they did, or maybe they didn't, but it hardly mattered. The light at midday spread across the settlement like spilled milk, thin, pale, and faintly warm. It softened the hard edges of tools, blurred footprints, and gave faces that gentle northern glow that makes everyone look slightly thoughtful, even when thinking about nothing at all. Work continued at the community's signature half-speed. Tasks drifted rather than progressed. People paused frequently, not to rest, but simply to consider, in that unhurried way, whether the thing they were doing was still the thing they wanted to be doing. Most of the time, the answer was yes. Sometimes, the answer was maybe after a few minutes of standing and staring vaguely at the middle distance. No drama disturbed the afternoon. A piece of twine snapped, and someone simply tied a new one. A tool slipped into the snow, and someone picked it up just as slowly. A gust of wind passed through the settlement, nudging a few loose strands of hair and making everyone briefly look up, as if acknowledging a friendly visitor who wasn't staying long. Near evening, the light dimmed into its usual bluish haze. People finished their tasks with the same soft efficiency that defined every end of day. A few final bundles were secured. Doors were pulled closed. Snow was brushed one last time. And then the world gradually settled into its overnight hush. The day finished exactly how it began, quietly, gently, without any sharp edges. By chapter 10, the settlement has reached that rare state where even nature seems to respect the daily routine. The snow falls quietly, never too fast, never too heavy. The wind arrives only in gentle intervals, like a kindly neighbor stopping by just long enough to say hello before remembering they left something simmering at home. Everything moves with the same soft predictability, as if the entire landscape has agreed to keep things calm. Morning emerges gradually again, no surprise there. A thin glow filters through the cracks of the dwellings, slipping across wooden floors in slow motion. Someone stirs. Someone else stretches. Another person sits up with the exact expression of a cat debating whether getting out of bed is truly worth it. Spoiler, it always is, eventually. Today's first real sound is the low murmur of someone clearing a bit of frost from a doorway. They brush it aside with the same care a librarian uses when handling a delicate old manuscript. Nothing is hurried. Nothing is forceful. Just a soft sweep, a small breath, and the day opens up. Outside, footprints from yesterday have blurred into gentle shapes. The snow has covered their edges, softening them until they look like shadows of footsteps rather than actual impressions. People walk over them without ceremony, creating new paths that will also fade. Everything here is temporary, but peacefully so. Work begins in familiar fragments. Someone adjusts a piece of equipment by a fraction so small it might require divine intervention to see. Another person smooths down a surface that has already been smoothed more times than seems reasonable. Someone nearby checks the weather by staring at the sky for an extended moment, providing a detailed meteorological forecast in the form of a single slow nod. The younger workers gather materials, stacking them carefully and then restacking them for reasons understood only by them. It's not inefficiency, it's artistry. Or at least that's what they seem to believe. An elder observes with quiet approval, adding a comment that manages to sound both wise and vaguely unrelated, something like, "Snow remembers the shape of every mountain, which everyone accepts as entirely normal." Midday drifts in with its usual pale light, a sort of dim brightness that feels more like a soft suggestion than a fully committed sun. It warms things only slightly, offering just enough glow to make the settlement feel awake but not energetic. Energetic would be off-brand. People spread out into their slow cycles of activity. Someone examines a bundle of materials bound in twine, gently testing the tension as if listening for a musical note. Another person sorts items by size, creating neat little lines that would absolutely delight anyone who enjoys tidiness as a personality trait. One person sits down to repair an object that, realistically, could have lasted another year without repair, but preventive care is a beloved ritual here. Children are once again the only vaguely chaotic presence, though even their chaos is muted. One child pokes a stick into a pile of snow, pleased by the small crater it forms. Another child follows a stray snowflake with their eyes, attempting to predict its landing with the seriousness of a seasoned astronomer. The adults watch them with a kind of resigned fondness, stepping around the little experiments without interrupting. As the afternoon deepens, the wind drifts through with soft persistence. It almost seems to be checking in, lifting a few strands of hair, nudging a cloth edge, reminding everyone that time is still moving even if it doesn't feel like it. People respond by tightening a few bindings and smoothing down anything that flutters. Not out of annoyance, just habit. The elders gather near a fire again, trading small observations about the world. Someone notes that the sky looks lighter than usual, though no one can quite explain what that means. Another mentions a memory from years ago, pausing before finishing the story because the ending isn't necessary. The others nod along, savoring the shared silence more than the words. Evening seeps into the settlement like ink in water, gently and evenly. Work slows without instruction. Tools are put away. Materials are covered. Snow is brushed from pathways in long, smooth motions. People drift homeward in soft clusters, each footstep a little quieter than the last. The day folds itself neatly into the rhythm of all the days before it. No events, no surprises, just the soft, endless repetition that gives life its gentle. Morning began, predictably, with the same soft glow filtering into dwellings. Someone stretched. Someone else pulled on boots that had been resting near the fire. The smoke rose lazily from chimneys, curling in gentle arcs, and the faint smell of embers mixed with cold air. It was a scent that carried comfort rather than urgency, a kind of olfactory lullaby that the people had grown accustomed to over generations. By mid-morning, the settlement hummed quietly, each person engaged in familiar routines. Someone arranged small items just so, checking alignment with a meticulousness that could almost be called meditative. Another brushed snow off a pathway in long, unhurried strokes. Someone tested the tension of a rope, and another adjusted a bundle of materials. Each movement was deliberate, each task repeated with slight variations, and yet the overall effect was seamless. Children wandered, small motions intersecting the adult's calm. One child poked at a snowdrift with a stick, making little indentations that would be erased by wind or footfalls within the hour. Another child traced shapes in the frost on a window, eyes following every curve and line with careful attention. The adults observed without comment, understanding that the quiet exploration of the young was part of the rhythm. There was no rush to interfere, no need for correction, just gentle guidance, absorbed through example rather than instruction. As the sun reached its slow zenith, the pale northern light softened all edges. Tools gleamed dimly. Snow shimmered faintly. Breath rose in gentle clouds and dissipated. The settlement seemed to pulse, not with energy, but with patience. Every small task, every minor adjustment, every soft check of snow, rope, or tool contributed to a subtle, communal cadence. This was life moving at a pace that demanded attention, but only the kind of attention that calms rather than excites. Mid-afternoon passed with minimal variation. Someone paused to note a slight change in wind direction. Someone else observed that a patch of snow had settled differently than it had the day before. Not life-altering changes, merely the small movements of a world in constant, gentle evolution. Conversations were short and subdued, often consisting of single sentences or a word and a nod. Humor was dry, soft, and almost imperceptible, surfacing as gentle commentary on the predictable quirks of the herd or the stubbornness of a piece of equipment. As evening approached, people gradually slowed their movements. Tasks were concluded not abruptly, but in a tapered, natural decline. A bundle of materials was secured. A tool was returned to its place. Paths were swept once more, leaving faint traces of methodical care. Children lingered near the edges, their explorations shrinking in scope as the light softened. The elders, always attuned to the smallest shifts, would gather by the fire. No formal meeting took place. They simply shared quiet observations, small corrections, or gentle stories from years past. Words were measured, delivered in soft tones, with long pauses that allowed both thought and silence to carry weight. The younger adults absorbed these moments, not with urgency, but with quiet acknowledgement, understanding that these shared patterns were as important as any task completed during the day. Night fell with an unhurried grace. Snow drifted quietly, covering footprints. The wind whispered through trees, but did not intrude. Fires burned low. People settled into their bedding, cocooned in furs. The herd rested nearby, movements almost imperceptible, their presence a gentle reminder of continuity. By the end of chapter 11, one understands that the essence of life here is not found in sudden events or startling changes. It is found in patience, repetition, and the quiet, persistent attention to detail that keeps both people and herd moving safely and comfortably through time. Days do not need to be remarkable to matter. They need only to unfold, gently, as they always have. The morning begins, predictably, with a soft glow slipping through the dwellings. Someone stirs beneath layers of furs, stretching slowly, like a cat considering whether the cold floor is worth stepping onto. Outside, smoke rises lazily from small fires, curling into the sky without urgency. The air carries a hint of embers, frost, and the faint aroma of dried meat and moss, a combination that somehow feels grounding rather than sharp. By mid-morning, the settlement hums gently. People move in soft waves. Someone inspects a tool for minor imperfections, pressing and twisting it with careful hands. Another person sweeps snow from a path, their brush strokes long and deliberate. A third adjusts a rope that is already adequate, making it just slightly more symmetrical, more orderly. None of this is urgent, all of it is deliberate. The world responds slowly, and the people move at its pace. Children wander among the adults, adding small, quiet interruptions. One child examines a piece of bark, turning it over and over, fascinated by its texture. Another traces faint lines in the snow, following curves with a precision born of curiosity rather than instruction. The adults watch and guide softly, rarely interfering, recognizing that the act of observation itself is a lesson. It is practice in patience, attention, and subtlety. By midday, light fills the settlement in a pale, diffused glow, softening edges and smoothing textures. The herd moves quietly in the distance, hooves making muted impressions in the snow. Their rhythm complements the human rhythm, each step harmonizing with the slow cadence of work, observation, and gentle care. Tasks continue in a deliberate flow. Bundles are tied, surfaces smoothed, tools aligned. Each small action is reinforced by the habit of repetition, a quiet meditation in motion. Conversations remain soft and sparse. Words are chosen carefully, often left trailing into silence. Dry humor surfaces occasionally, a quiet, knowing remark about the stubbornness of a reindeer, the tilt of a bundle, or the minor misalignment of a tool, but it never disrupts the calm. The humor is subtle, almost imperceptible, like a soft breeze brushing past. As afternoon fades into evening, the pace of life tapers naturally. Tasks are concluded with careful precision, without fanfare. Materials are stored, paths are cleared once more, and the settlement begins to fold in on itself. The light diminishes slowly, washing the world in muted blues and grays. Shadows lengthen but remain soft, lending the landscape a sense of gentle enclosure. Elders gather near the fire again, exchanging quiet observations. Stories are told without urgency, their endings unimportant. Wisdom is shared subtly, interwoven with small actions, gestures, and glances. Younger adults absorb these lessons passively, understanding that repetition, continuity, and careful attention form the backbone of daily life. Night approaches gradually, accompanied by the soft sigh of the wind through the trees. The herd settles, exhaling warm clouds into the cold. People cocoon themselves in furs, the quiet rhythm of the day transitioning seamlessly into the calm of night. Every breath, every shuffle, every faint murmur is part of the ambient continuity, a soft soundtrack for sleep and reflection. Morning begins with its usual quiet gestures. Someone shifts under furs, stretching slowly, aware but unhurried. A faint wisp of smoke rises from the fire, curling lazily before dispersing into the cold air. The faint smells of warmth, dried meat, and moss mingle, grounding those who are awake and drawing out the sleepers a little more gently than the light alone would. By mid-morning, the gentle hum of activity begins to thread through the settlement. A person checks a rope, even though it is already adequate, pressing it gently and adjusting the angle slightly, a ritual more than necessity. Someone else smooths a work surface, running their hands over it in tiny, careful movements. Another walks along the edge of a path, brushing snow aside in long, meditative strokes. Each movement is deliberate, slow, and thoughtful, forming a rhythm that binds the people, the tools, and the environment into a unified cadence. Children wander within this rhythm, their curiosity unfolding in quiet arcs. One traces shapes in the frost on a window, eyes following lines that no one else sees. Another discovers a small hollow in the snow, investigating it with deliberate care, poking at it with a stick, and stepping back to watch how it reacts. Adults observe softly, rarely interrupting, understanding that the act of exploration itself is a lesson in patience, awareness, and the subtle observation of natural patterns. By noon, light flattens into a pale luminescence. Shadows are soft and long, tools glint faintly, and the quiet exhalations of the herd punctuate the ambient sounds of human activity. The rhythm of the day flows. Items are sorted, materials are bound, surfaces are smooth. Nothing urgent, nothing dramatic. Every motion is measured, considered, and deliberate, a small contribution to the ongoing continuity of life in the settlement. Conversations, when they occur, are brief, soft, and often infused with a gentle humor that is understated enough to blend with the rhythm rather than interrupt it. Elders offer quiet observations. A slight note on the wind's direction, a minor change in snow texture, a remembered detail from a past season. These comments drift through the day, noted and absorbed rather than debated. They form a quiet narrative backdrop, emphasizing continuity over novelty. As afternoon wanes, the pace tapers. Tasks conclude naturally, without fanfare or finality. Tools are returned to their places. Paths are swept, and small adjustments are made where necessary. The settlement seems to fold in upon itself, guided by the soft geometry of habit. Each gesture contributes to a sense of ongoing order and quiet comfort, reinforcing the underlying rhythm of life. Evening arrives in muted tones. Shadows stretch and soften. Fires burn low, exhaling warmth and scent into the crisp air. The herd settles, and people cocoon themselves in furs, preparing for the long night. There is no abrupt transition. The end of day flows seamlessly into the calm of night. Every sound, every movement, every breath reinforces the gentle tempo that has defined the settlement for generations. Morning begins with its usual, slow emergence. Light seeps softly through the cracks of dwellings, brushing over furs, tools, and faces alike. Someone shifts beneath layers of warmth, stretching limbs with deliberation. Fires are coaxed into gentle activity, the smoke curling lazily into the still air. A faint aroma of dried moss and preserved food drifts outward, merging with the crisp cold of dawn. There is no urgency, no expectation. Just the quiet unfolding of another day. Mid-morning activity flows gradually. Individuals check tools with careful hands, smooth surfaces, and arrange materials into patterns that make sense only in the context of habit. Every movement is intentional, slow, and measured, forming a cadence that links every person to every task, every corner of the settlement, and every member of the herd. Nothing is rushed, there is no excess motion. Every gesture carries the weight of thoughtfulness. Children contribute their own subdued rhythm. One traces shapes in snow or frost with precise attention, another examines a twig or leaf, pressing it gently to observe texture and form. Adults allow these minor interferences, understanding that the exploration of small details is as integral to the day as tying a bundle or adjusting a tool. The settlement exists not merely to complete tasks, but to maintain a cadence, a soft, continuous pulse of life. By midday, pale northern light softens edges and blends forms together. Shadows are subtle, tools gleam faintly, and the exhalations of people and herd alike punctuate the quiet with gentle reminders of warmth and presence. Tasks continue in loops, inspecting, adjusting, smoothing, and binding. Each repetition carries its own satisfaction, independent of recognition or urgency. The rhythm itself is its own reward. Conversations, when they occur, are minimal. Comments on weather, snow, or herd behavior drift quietly between people. Elders offer insights, brief memories, or gentle corrections, all delivered in a tone that matches the ambient calm. Younger adults absorb these observations quietly, learning less through instruction than through immersion in the flow of daily life. As afternoon softens into evening, movement slows naturally. Tasks conclude not suddenly, but through a gradual tapering. Tools are returned, paths are brushed, and minor adjustments are completed. The settlement seems to fold inward on itself, a gentle compression of time and space that signals the end of the active day. People and herd alike settle into quiet observation of the dimming light. Night descends slowly, in hues of muted gray and blue. Fires burn low, providing warmth without urgency. The herd rests, exhaling soft clouds of breath into the cold. Individuals retreat to their dwellings, cocooned in furs, listening to the quiet hum of life continuing without spectacle or fanfare. Every small sound, footsteps on snow, the faint shift of a bundle, the creak of wood, blends seamlessly into the ambient cadence. Fires stir slowly. Smoke rises in languid curls. Someone checks the edge of a bundle, nudging it slightly. Another smooths a surface that has already been smoothed countless times. These small gestures, repeated across the settlement, form a rhythm that is both reassuring and hypnotic. Every movement is deliberate, measured, and purposeful, yet so calm that it almost seems accidental. Children wander gently, small pockets of curiosity moving within the larger rhythm. One traces a pattern in the frost on a window, following the curves of ice with delicate fingers. Another bends over a patch of snow, pressing down to see what shapes emerge. Adults observe quietly, stepping lightly to avoid interrupting these gentle explorations. The lessons here are absorbed passively: patience, attention, and the slow unfolding of curiosity. By mid-morning, the pale northern light softens shadows across tools, paths, and the occasional animal wandering nearby. A quiet hum of activity pervades the settlement. Someone adjusts a rope, even though it was already sufficient. Another person aligns bundles, checking their symmetry as if minor perfection matters more than anything else in the world. Someone else traces a shallow groove in a path, brushing snow aside with a slow, meditative hand. The rhythm continues through midday. Conversations are minimal and soft, almost a background note in the ambient music of the day. Elders may remark on a slight shift in snow texture or recall a minor memory of winters past, delivering it in a tone of gentle authority. Younger adults absorb the information quietly, not as instruction, but as part of the ongoing pattern of life. The day progresses without interruption, the calm repetition itself being the primary activity. Afternoon moves in without urgency. Tools are inspected, tasks repeated, paths maintained. Even minor deviations, a misaligned bundle or a crooked rope, are met with gentle corrections, not reprimands. Every action reinforces the larger rhythm, contributing to the slow, hypnotic continuity that defines the settlement. The herd moves in muted synchronization with human activity, hooves pressing softly into snow that already knows the shape of their steps. As evening approaches, the pace tapers naturally. Tasks conclude quietly. Tools are returned to their places. Snow is brushed from paths. Small adjustments are made, not out of necessity, but because the act of tending is comforting. Shadows lengthen gently, painting the settlement in soft blues and muted grays. The air cools, the light fades, and the world begins to fold in on itself. Night settles without abruptness. Fires burn low, casting faint warmth. The herd rests, exhaling small clouds of breath into the cold, their presence reinforcing the calm. People retreat to their dwellings, cocooned in furs. Footsteps, small adjustments, and faint movements blend into the ambient hum of life, continuing, uninterrupted, predictable, and perfectly serene. Not every porter was born for the life of endless steps. Some were strong, sure, with calves like carved stone and backs that seemed to defy logic. Others were less ideally suited. It's worth imagining them anyway. Perhaps one had a slight limp that made balance tricky on narrow ledges, or perhaps another had an unfortunate habit of humming off-key, which irritated the experienced carriers. Yet each person was part of the chain, indispensable in their own way. Step, step, step. Some porters became minor celebrities in their villages for their endurance. A man who could carry 3 times the usual load up a steep pass might earn local fame, though rarely any tangible reward beyond a quiet nod from a distant official. A woman who expertly balanced textiles without crushing delicate weavings might earn admiration at the local tambo. These were subtle forms of prestige, quiet acknowledgments, like a sigh of respect along the high mountain breeze. Step, step, step. Porters sometimes traveled in mixed groups. Young and old, tall and short, experienced and novice. Each group developed its own rhythm, sometimes with a leader calling out instructions in a monotone chant. Left foot, right foot, hold it steady, step, step, step. It was repetitive, but repetition was life. And it allowed the empire to function in ways that, if you think about it too much, are almost absurdly efficient. Roads stretching thousands of miles, supplies moving without wheels or beasts of burden that could handle heavy loads, just human determination, carefully measured steps, and an occasional llama. Step, step, step. The mountains themselves seemed to judge the porters, rewarding careful balance and punishing carelessness. Snowfields, hidden crevasses, sudden gusts of wind. Step, step, step. Imagine stepping onto a narrow ledge, wind pressing against your body, the weight on your back pressing down like a constant reminder that gravity is never wrong. Step, step, step. The faintest miscalculation could send you sliding, though the experienced often knew how to counterbalance instinctively. Step, step, step. Food for these porters was practical. High-energy staples like maize, potatoes, and occasionally dried meat. Some carried coca leaves, chewed to maintain stamina and counteract altitude sickness. Rarely, they might enjoy more luxurious items, a small amount of roasted corn or a piece of sweet potato. But indulgence was limited. Step, step, step. Nutrition was functional. The mountains didn't care about cravings. Step, step, step. Rest stops, or tambos, were critical. They were spaced along the roads, often near springs or sheltered areas. Porters could lay down, adjust loads, or swap responsibilities with fresh carriers. Some tambos were simple structures, walls of stone with thatched roofs, others more sophisticated, with raised platforms to keep grain dry. Even in rest, there was order. Step, step, step. The empire required that roads function like clockwork, and the human clock had to keep time as well. Step, step, step. Individual stories get lost in the collective rhythm, but some survive in small ways. An elderly man who refused to slow down even after decades on the road, insisting that he could still carry loads faster than most younger porters. A teenage girl who could balance multiple sacks of maize without spilling a single kernel, earning the nickname Feather Walker, though nobody remembers who first gave it to her. Step, step, step. These minor legends were whispers in the wind, fading with each season but preserved in the steady hum of the empire's transport network. Step, step, step. And then there were accidents, quietly tragic. A misjudged step, a loose stone, a sudden gust. Porters sometimes fell, breaking a leg or worse, leaving the group to adjust silently and continue. There was no heroic rescue in the mountains. Survival meant adaptation. Step, step, step. Life was mostly mundane and methodical, punctuated occasionally by small, unfortunate disasters. Step, step, step. Porters also carried items for ceremonial purposes. Sacred textiles, offerings for distant shrines, sometimes even small ritual objects for local gods. Step, step, step. The weight of responsibility was both literal and symbolic. Each careful footfall honored not only the mountains and the empire but also the spiritual obligations woven into the fabric of daily life. Step, step, step. Weather could be subtle or extreme. The sun at high altitude could be dazzling, the wind slicing cold and thin. Rain and snow made the paths slick. Step, step, step. Porters had to anticipate conditions, sometimes covering routes in clouds and mist where visibility was limited. There were strategies, placing the heaviest loads closest to the body, distributing weight evenly, coordinating with companions to avoid imbalance. Step, step, step. It was an exercise in patience and precise timing. There was also hierarchy quietly enforced. Experienced porters often led, signaling pace and warning of hazards. Younger carriers followed, learning rhythm and endurance through observation. Llamas, when present, followed naturally, guided by ropes and commands. Step, step, step. Leadership was subtle, a gentle authority that ensured continuity rather than dramatic displays of power. Step. Communication across distances was critical. Porters might rely on whistles or small drumming signals to maintain cohesion in foggy conditions. Step. Signals were concise and repetitive, the code of the mountains, subtle yet unyielding. Step. Even silence was meaningful, marking dangerous stretches or signaling rest. Step. Sometimes, porters would encounter travelers or emissaries from distant regions. Exchanges were polite, brief, and practical. Step. Conversation might cover local conditions, recent weather, or updates on nearby construction projects. Rarely would there be gossip and never heroics. Step. Efficiency reigned quietly with an almost hypnotic insistence. Step. The physicality of the work shaped personalities. Some porters were stoic, absorbed in rhythm and repetition. Others were quietly competitive, measuring stamina against companions. Step. There were no grand gestures, just the endless, unbroken cadence of effort. Step. And yet, despite monotony, there were small joys. A view of a valley bathed in morning light. The unexpected cry of a condor overhead. The satisfaction of arranging a load perfectly, knowing it would reach the next tambo intact. Step. These minor victories were enough to sustain morale. Step. Some porters developed personal strategies to cope. Counting steps, humming quietly, adjusting posture, shifting loads subtly to relieve tension. Step. These little routines, repeated daily, became second nature. Step. Even in the most isolated stretches, there was community. Porters watched over each other. Experienced carriers helped novices navigate difficult terrain. Step. There was an unspoken agreement. Survival and efficiency mattered more than individuality. Step. The life of a porter could be long or short. Some continued into old age, their bodies adapting to the rhythm of high-altitude walking. Others faltered early, worn down by continuous exertion. Step. The mountains took little notice of age or ambition. Step. At night, rest was careful and deliberate. Loads were stored securely, campfires kept low, blankets spread on stone floors. Step. Sleep came slowly at first, lulled by the memory of constant motion and the faint echo of footsteps across stone paths. Step. Dreams often mirrored the journey, undulating terraces, endless switchbacks, rhythmic shuffling of feet, the quiet patience of the high Andes. Step. In a sense, the porters themselves became part of the landscape. Their movements were predictable yet essential, a human echo of the mountain's own rhythms. Step. The empire depended on them, the gods watched over them, and the Andes carried on, indifferent and eternal. Step. And so, with each careful footfall, the Inca roads persisted, carrying the empire's lifeblood across peaks and valleys. There were no medals, no songs, just the quiet, hypnotic cadence of human endurance. Step. Some loads were entirely practical: maize, potatoes, textiles. Others were ceremonial. Certain porters were entrusted with sacred items intended for shrines or festivals. Imagine carrying bundles of finely woven cloth, brightly colored with natural dyes, knowing that a single tear or smudge could be considered an ill omen. Step. The burden was both physical and symbolic. Step. Ceremonial transport demanded absolute attention. The porters had to balance, pace, and even coordinate breathing in some ways, ensuring that sacred textiles, ritual objects, or offerings arrived intact. The rhythm of the mountains became a rhythm of respect. Step. The air was thin, the paths steep, but there was a quiet mindfulness. Step. Sometimes, multiple porters would carry a single ceremonial load. They moved in coordinated silence, a human balance beam spanning high terraces and narrow bridges. One misstep could ruin the item, or worse, be interpreted as a warning from the gods. Step. Carefulness was the first law of ceremonial transport. Step. The roads themselves were marvels of subtle engineering. stone paths carved from rock faces, switchbacks that allowed gradual ascent, and suspension bridges woven from braided fibers. Each element demanded attention. Step, step, step. Even experienced porters paused to test the stability of bridges or the firmness of stones. Step, step, step. Weather dictated routine. Sudden rainstorms transformed dry stone into slick slides. Snowfields hid crevasses and loose rocks. Wind threatened balance with invisible force. Step, step, step. A seasoned porter might sway slightly, adjust the load, and continue, while a novice stumbled. Step, step, step. Adaptation was constant, subtle, and uncelebrated. Step, step, step. Porters often traveled in mixed groups, experienced and novice, male and female, young and old. There were subtle hierarchies quietly enforced. Leaders set pace and issued soft instructions. Step, step, step. Younger porters learned rhythm and endurance through observation, sometimes imitating the humming or counting methods of their elders. Step, step, step. Humming and rhythmic counting served multiple purposes. It coordinated steps across the group, reduced mental fatigue, and provided a meditative focus. Step, step, step. Sometimes, the mountains echoed these soft sounds, blending human effort with natural soundscapes. Step, step, step. Food and rest were ritualized. Tambos provided dry, ventilated spaces, often stocked with maize, potatoes, and occasional dried meat. Porters rotated responsibilities, adjusting loads, monitoring llamas, checking ropes. Step, step, step. Even brief rests demanded organization. Step, step, step. Llamas, ever unpredictable, could both aid and frustrate. Some moved almost instinctively across narrow ledges, others balked at minor distractions. Step, step, step. Guides and ropes kept them on course. Step, step, step. Care, patience, and experience mitigated the animal's occasional stubbornness. Step, step, step. Porters' personal routines were subtle yet vital. Counting steps, humming quietly, adjusting posture, or shifting loads to relieve tension. Step, step, step. Minor rituals became second nature, shaping a slow, methodical approach to labor. Step, step, step. The physical strain shaped character. Stoicism, quiet determination, and endurance became hallmarks of experience. Step, step, step. Some competed in small ways, carrying heavier loads, maintaining smoother rhythm, or balancing quipus without error. Step, step, step. Accidents were quietly tragic. A misjudged step could crush maize, damage textiles, or injure a porter. Step, step, step. Yet even these moments were integrated into the rhythm of life. Step, step, step. The caravan adjusted, the empire continued, and the road remained constant. Step, step, step. The Inca logistics system was subtle but brilliant. Relay systems allowed goods and messages to flow without pause. Step, step, step. Each participant, human or animal, became a cog in a vast, uncelebrated machine. Step, step, step. Efficiency was invisible, like the slow erosion of stone. Step, step, step. The psychological aspect was as important as the physical. Long stretches of monotony, high altitude, and repetitive steps demanded mental discipline. Step, step, step. Experienced porters achieved a meditative state, almost merging with the mountains. Step, step, step. Focus, rhythm, balance. Step, step, step. Cultural understanding shaped every action. The MITA labor system dictated obligations, ceremonial transport demanded reverence, and practical transport required unerring attention. Step, step, step. Each stride was part of a greater plan. Step, step, step. Even minor interactions mattered. Passing travelers exchanged brief information about conditions, hazards, or supplies. Step, step, step. These exchanges were quiet, functional, and rarely recorded. Step, step, step. Porters carried messages too. Runners, or chaskis, delivered information across vast distances. Step, step, step. Coordination between carriers and runners ensured that the empire's communication network functioned flawlessly. Step, step, step. Sleep was functional, brief, and restorative. Loads were secured, fires kept low, blankets spread on stone floors. Step, step, step. Dreams echoed the day. Switchbacks, rhythmic footfalls, distant humming and soft commands. Step, step, step. Even minor victories mattered. Perfectly balanced loads, a safe passage across a narrow ledge, or a successful transport of ceremonial textiles offered subtle pride. Step, step, step. These quiet achievements were the unspoken rewards of a life dictated by rhythm. Step, step, step. The landscape itself became familiar. Stone paths, terrace slopes, and distant peaks became landmarks. Step, step, step. Mental maps guided porters as surely as physical coordination. Step, step, step. Coordination was subtle. Leaders guided, younger porters followed, and llamas stayed mostly obedient. Step, step, step. Silence was as important as sound, warning of danger or signaling rest. Step, step, step. Over time, experience shaped intuition. An experienced porter could predict a rock's slipperiness, anticipate a gust of wind, or balance a load intuitively. Step, step, step. This quiet mastery was uncelebrated but essential. Step, step, step. The empire's quiet brilliance rested on these unheralded experts. Step, step, step. Supplies, messages, and ceremonial items flowed seamlessly, largely unnoticed. Step, step, step. Efficiency depended on countless individual steps, repeated day after day. Step, step, step. Step, step, step. Step, step, step. Step, step, step. Not all stretches of the road were equal. Some were gentle inclines through terraced valleys, where porters could maintain a steady, unremarkable rhythm for hours. Others were steep, rocky passes where the air thinned, the wind cut sharply, and one misstep could turn a mundane march into a delicate balancing act. Step, step, step. The mountains were patient instructors, and everyone eventually learned their lessons. Step, step, step. Accidents were quietly inevitable. A foot slipping on damp stone, a bundle of maize toppling, a llama veering unexpectedly. Step, step, step. Nothing dramatic, but enough to make porters pause, adjust, and continue. Step, step, step. These minor setbacks were absorbed into the rhythm of life, quietly shaping experience and resilience. Step, step, step. Some porters developed personal tricks for handling steep or treacherous terrain. Slightly leaning into the slope, adjusting the load closer to the center of gravity, timing breath with footfalls. Step, step, step. These were subtle arts, passed down quietly among experienced carriers. Step, step, step. Llamas, again, were both help and hindrance. Some navigated cliffs effortlessly, as if understanding the weight they carried mattered to the universe. Others, however, would spook at a passing bird, the sound of wind through a crevice, or even a shadow, forcing porters to redistribute weight quickly. Step, step, step. Patience was essential. Step, step, step. Porters also carried quipus, the knotted string devices used for record keeping. A single dropped knot could disrupt administrative records. Step, step, step. The responsibility, though invisible to most, added quiet gravity to each step. Step, step, step. The social aspect of the march remained subtle but meaningful. Experienced carriers guided younger porters, offering minor advice on posture, pacing, or load adjustments. Step, step, step. The rhythm was cooperative, almost meditative. Step, step, step. Even in the harshest weather, routines persisted. Snow and rain required careful navigation, adjustments in clothing, and careful attention to each step. Step, step, step. Porters adapted, learned, and continued. Step, step, step. Some porters gained quiet fame. A man who could carry 3 times the average load for twice the distance. A woman whose step never faltered despite wind, altitude, and unstable paths. Step, step, step. These stories were local legends, whispered in villages or shared at tambos. Step, step, step. Meals remained functional, practical, and minimal. Maize, potatoes, dried meat. Occasionally a roasted guinea pig or a sweet potato treat. Step, step, step. Nutrition served endurance, not pleasure. Step, step, step. Tambos were vital. Sheltered areas, stocked with supplies, offering brief respite. Step, step, step. Loads were adjusted, animals tended, and brief rest taken. Step, step, step. Sleep was functional. Blankets spread, fires kept low, rest brief but necessary. Step, step, step. Porter's mental focus was constant. Step, step, step. Humming or counting steps reduced fatigue and maintained rhythm. Step, step, step. The monotony itself became a kind of meditation. Step, step, step. Coordination within the caravan remained subtle. Leaders set pace, warned of hazards, and monitored loads. Step, step, step. Novices observed, learned rhythm, and followed. Step, step, step. Even minor disruptions were handled quietly. Step, step, step. Ceremonial loads demanded particular attention. Sacred textiles, offerings, and ritual items traveled carefully. Step, step, step. Balance, pacing, and reverence combined in silent choreography. Step, step, step. A dropped item was a minor disaster, a reminder that even small mistakes could have symbolic consequences. Step, step, step. The Inca road network itself was a marvel. Thousands of miles of stone and earth paths, carefully maintained, connecting distant regions. Step, step, step. Caravans of porters, llamas, and runners kept the empire functioning unseen, like an invisible machine. Step, step, step. Fatigue shaped character. Stoicism, quiet determination, and endurance were prized, silently recognized by companions. Step, step, step. Small competitions measured strength, rhythm, and balance. Step, step, step. Accidents, though quiet, shaped the journey. Minor falls, toppling loads, startled llamas. Step, step, step. The rhythm persisted regardless. Step, step, step. The mountains demanded patience and attention. Step, step, step. Personal rituals became vital. Counting steps, humming, adjusting posture, shifting loads. Step, step, step. These routines allowed focus and preserved energy. Step, step, step. The physical landscape shaped every decision. Step, step, step. Switchbacks, cliffs, rivers, and snowfields required constant vigilance. Step, step, step. Experience guided navigation, almost instinctively. Step, step, step. Messages traveled along these paths as well. Chasquis relayed information rapidly, but even they respected the mountains. Step, step, step. Coordination with porters ensured efficiency. Step, step, step. Porters' lives were largely anonymous, but the empire depended on them. Step, step, step. Supplies, messages, and ceremonial items flowed reliably. Step, step, step. Efficiency was quiet, almost invisible, but indispensable. Step, step, step. Sleep remained functional, brief, and restorative. Step, step, step. Rest at tambos preserved energy, ensured safety, and allowed the rhythm to continue. Step, step, step. Minor triumphs punctuated monotony. Perfectly balanced loads, smooth passage across narrow ledges, safe arrival of sacred items. Step, step, step. These quiet victories offered pride and reassurance. Step, step, step. Experience shaped intuition. Step, step, step. Porters anticipated hazards, adjusted loads, and coordinated with companions. Step, step, step. Quiet mastery became second nature. Step, step, step. The Inca road network wasn't just a single path. It was an entire system, stretching thousands of miles, connecting the highest peaks to distant valleys. Step, step, step. Porters were integral cogs in this quiet, uncelebrated machine. Step, step, step. Without them, the empire would have functioned far less smoothly. Step, step, step. Relay systems were subtle but brilliant. A load might travel hundreds of miles, passing from one group of porters to another. Step, step, step. Runners, llamas, and carriers coordinated seamlessly. Step, step, step. Efficiency was invisible, almost meditative. Step, step, step. Ceremonial items required extra care. Sacred textiles, offerings, and ritual objects moved slowly, deliberately. Step, step, step. Porters ensured that these objects remained intact and respected. Step, step, step. Each careful stride honored both the gods and the mountains. Step, step, step. Some porters had quirks. One might whistle softly to keep rhythm. Another counted steps aloud, synchronizing with companions. Step, step, step. These small routines preserved focus and stamina. Step, step, step. Llamas, again, added subtle challenges. Some followed instructions with surprising obedience. Others, distracted by the smallest detail, required constant attention. Step, step, step. Guides adapted, shifted weight, or coaxed animals gently. Step, step, step. Porters also developed small competitions to pass time. Who could carry the heaviest load without faltering? Who could maintain the smoothest rhythm across difficult terrain? Step, step, step. Minor games encouraged focus and pride. Step, step, step. The mountains demanded awareness. Switchbacks, cliffs, rivers, and snowfields required constant attention. Step, step, step. Experience taught anticipation, balance, and subtle adjustment. Step, step, step. Mistakes were absorbed quietly, shaping intuition. Step, step, step. Food remained practical and functional. Maize, potatoes, dried meat. Occasionally a small treat. Step, step, step. Meals sustained endurance, not indulgence. Step, step, step. Tambos offered essential rest. Loads were adjusted, llamas tended, brief meals eaten. Step, step, step. Sleep was short, functional, and restorative. Step, step, step. Accidents, though minor, occurred. A toppled load, a misstep, a startled llama. Step, step, step. These were quietly absorbed, and the rhythm continued. Step, step, step. Personal rituals became habits. Counting steps, humming, adjusting posture, shifting loads. Step, step, step. Each repetition strengthened focus and endurance. Step, step, step. Even minor successes mattered. Balanced loads, safe navigation of dangerous ledges, successful delivery of ceremonial items. Step, step, step. Quiet pride and reassurance followed these small victories. Step, step, step. The empire's quiet brilliance rested on thousands of such unheralded individuals. Step, step, step. Supplies, messages, and sacred items flowed reliably. Step, step, step. Efficiency remained invisible but indispensable. Step, step, step. Porters merged with the landscape over time. Step, step, step. Familiarity with stone paths, switchbacks, terraces, and peaks became instinctual. Step, step, step. Knowledge of terrain shaped intuition and survival. Step, step, step. Communication was subtle. Whistles, drum signals, and silence conveyed instructions or warnings. Step, step, step. Coordination depended on experience, observation, and anticipation. Step, step, step. Ceremonial transport required mindfulness. A sacred textile, once dropped, could be interpreted as an omen. Step, step, step. Balance, pacing, and focus combined in silent choreography. Step, step, step. The monotony, though gentle, became meditative. Step, step, step. Repetition cultivated patience, endurance, and subtle mastery of body and load. Step, step, step. Even in isolation, porters were part of something greater. Step, step, step. The empire relied on each stride, each careful adjustment, each rhythmic footfall. Step, step, step. Recognition was quiet or non-existent, but the work mattered. Step, step, step. Extreme terrain remained challenging. Narrow ledges, steep cliffs, icy passes. Step, step, step. Each step required vigilance, subtle adjustment, and quiet persistence. Step, step, step. Llamas, terrain, weather, and load interacted continuously. Step, step, step. Each variable demanded attention and adaptation. Step, step, step. Porters' mental discipline matched physical endurance. Step, step, step. Focus, rhythm, and observation were continuous. Step, step, step. Sleep remained functional and restorative. Step, step, step. Tambos offered safe shelter, brief meals, and preparation for continuation. Step, step, step. Minor victories were quietly celebrated. Balanced loads, smooth passage, safe transport of sacred items. Step, step, step. These achievements offered reassurance and subtle pride. Step, step, step. The roads persisted, timeless and patient. Step, step, step. The empire moved through human effort and quiet coordination. Step, step, step. Step, step, step. Step, step, step. Some porters became quiet legends in their communities, though they rarely received formal recognition. A man who carried twice the average load across a particularly steep pass. A woman whose step never faltered even in heavy snow. Step, step, step. These stories were shared in whispers around fires or in kitchens, never inscribed on stone, but remembered nonetheless. Step, step, step. There were those with unusual habits. One porter reportedly hummed the same monotonous tune day after day, claiming it helped him keep pace with the llamas. Another would tap lightly on the load to ensure even weight distribution. Step, step, step. These quirks, while subtle, contributed to efficiency and endurance. Step, step, step. The terrain demanded constant attention. Switchbacks, narrow ledges, and sudden drops required both concentration and subtle adjustment of the load. Step, step, step. A single misjudged step could topple goods, startle llamas, or injure a companion. Step, step, step. Experience and intuition guided movement more than instructions. Step, step, step. Weather was another quiet adversary. Sudden gusts of wind could shift balance, while sun and altitude drained stamina. Step, step, step. Rain transformed paths into slippery slides. Snow concealed hidden hazards. Step, step, step. Adaptation was constant and subtle. Step, step, step. Food remained practical. Maize, dried potatoes, and occasional dried meat sustained energy. Step, step, step. Porters ate quickly and efficiently, never lingering, as the rhythm of the road demanded continuous movement. Step, step, step. Tambos offered necessary respite. Porters rested briefly, adjusted loads, and prepared for the next stretch. Step, step, step. Even in rest, there was purpose, checking ropes, balancing llamas, and ensuring supplies were secure. Step, step, step. Some porters developed minor competitions to maintain focus. Who could carry a heavier load? Who could keep the smoothest rhythm over a long stretch? Step, step, step. These were quiet games, providing minor entertainment and subtle pride. Step, step, step. Ceremonial transport demanded care. Sacred textiles, offerings, and objects traveled slowly and deliberately. Step, step, step. Balance, pace, and reverence became intertwined with physical effort. Step, step, step. Dropped items were minor disasters, quietly absorbed into the daily rhythm. Step, step, step. Llamas could be both reliable and unpredictable. Some followed instructions almost instinctively, others spooked at small disturbances. Step, step, step. Guides adjusted loads or coaxed animals patiently. Step, step, step. Mental discipline was as vital as physical endurance. Step, step, step. Counting steps, humming, or subtle rituals helped maintain focus over hours and days. Step, step, step. Repetition became meditation. Step, step, step. Communication remained subtle. Whistles, drum signals, and even silence conveyed instructions. Step, step, step. Coordination depended on observation, experience, and anticipation. Step, step, step. Porters learned the landscape intimately. Stone paths, terraces, cliffs, and peaks were memorized and integrated into intuition. Step, step, step. Knowledge of the mountains ensured survival and efficiency. Step, step, step. Accidents, though minor, were inevitable. Missteps, toppled loads, startled llamas. Step, step, step. The rhythm persisted. Step, step, step. Experience absorbed error, teaching patience and careful attention. Step, step, step. Small victories mattered. Perfectly balanced loads, smooth passage across difficult terrain, and successful delivery of ceremonial items offered subtle pride. Step, step, step. These minor achievements were the unspoken rewards of a life dictated by rhythm. Step, step, step. Even in isolation, porters were part of a larger network. Step, step, step. Each careful footfall contributed to the movement of supplies, messages, and sacred items across the empire. Step, step, step. Recognition was rare, but the work was essential. Step, step, step. Extreme passes demanded subtle mastery. Narrow ledges, icy paths, steep switchbacks. Step, step, step. Every step required vigilance, balance, and awareness of companions and animals. Step, step, step. Ceremonial obligations added another layer of quiet tension. A sacred item, once dropped, was interpreted as a bad omen. Step, step, step. Precision and reverence were constant. Step, step, step. Porters merged with the rhythm of the mountains over time. Step, step, step. Familiarity with paths, terraces, and peaks became instinctual. Step, step, step. Intuition guided movement as much as instruction. Step, step, step. Sleep remained functional, brief, and restorative. Step, step, step. Tambos provided shelter, meals, and preparation for the next leg. Step, step, step. Minor quirks and routines persisted. Counting steps, humming tunes, adjusting loads subtly. Step, step, step. These small behaviors reinforced endurance and focus. Step, step, step. Porters' lives were quiet, unheralded, and essential. Step, step, step. Supplies, messages, and sacred items flowed reliably, sustained by human effort and subtle discipline. Step, step, step. Efficiency was invisible but indispensable. Step, step, step. The empire moved in silence, carried on countless small, steady footfalls. Step, step, step. The roads persisted, mountains endured, and porters' quiet rhythm continued. Step, step, step. Step, step, step. Step, step, step. Some stretches of the road were gentle, others were unforgiving. High mountain passes challenged even the most experienced porters. Step, step, step. Narrow ledges, sheer cliffs, sudden snowfields. Step, step, step. Every footfall required attention, balance, and patience. Step, step, step. A misjudged step could have subtle consequences. A bundle of maize might tumble, a llama spook slightly, or a companion stumble. Step, step, step. These were quiet mishaps, absorbed into the rhythm, rarely dramatic, but enough to demand readjustment. Step, step, step. Weather amplified the difficulty. High-altitude winds sliced thinly, rain made stones slick, and sun drained stamina. Step, step, step. Snow concealed hidden hazards, demanding careful foot placement. Step, step, step. Adaptation was constant. Step, step, step. Some porters developed small strategies for endurance. Breathing in rhythm with steps, subtle shifts of posture, adjusting loads to maintain balance. Step, step, step. These minor adjustments preserved energy and prevented mishaps. Step, step, step. The physical toll accumulated over years. Knees wore down, backs stiffened, and joints ached. Step, step, step. Some porters continued into old age, their bodies hardened by repetition and adaptation. Step, step, step. Others faltered early, worn down by constant exertion. Step, step, step. Llamas were both helpers and challenges. Some walked instinctively across cliffs and terraces. Others startled at minor disturbances, requiring constant attention. Step, step, step. Guides adjusted loads and coaxed animals patiently. Step, step, step. Ceremonial loads added subtle pressure. Sacred textiles, ritual objects, and offerings demanded care. Step, step, step. A single drop could be considered a bad omen. Step, step, step. Porters carried both weight and responsibility. Step, step, step. Quipus, the knotted record-keeping devices, were equally delicate. Step, step, step. A dropped or tangled quipu could disrupt information flow. Step, step, step. Attention to detail was constant, even amid fatigue. Step, step, step. Tambos offered necessary rest. Step, step, step. Sheltered spaces, stocked provisions, and brief respite allowed continued movement. Step, step, step. Sleep was functional and restorative, short but essential. Step, step, step. Minor rituals persisted. Step counting, humming, posture adjustments, load shifts. Step, step, step. These subtle habits became instinctive, reinforcing endurance and focus. Step, step, step. Extreme passes created natural tests of skill. Step, step, step. Narrow ledges, icy patches, and sudden drops demanded experience and caution. Step, step, step. Mistakes were minor but instructive. Step, step, step. Some porters gained quiet fame for endurance. Step, step, step. Tales of carrying twice the usual load across high passes, or of navigating treacherous terrain without faltering. Step, step, step. These stories were whispered locally, never formally recorded. Step, step, step. Food remained simple but sufficient. Step, step, step. Maize, dried potatoes, dried meat, and occasional small treats. Step, step, step. Meals preserved energy for continued steps. Step, step, step. Communication was subtle. Step, step, step. Whistles, drum signals, or silence conveyed instructions. Step, step, step. Coordination depended on observation and experience. Step, step, step. Over time, porters merged with the rhythm of the mountains. Step, step, step. Familiarity with paths, terraces, and peaks became intuitive. Step, step, step. Experience guided movement more than instruction. Step, step, step. Accidents, though minor, shaped journeys. Step, step, step. Missteps, toppled loads, startled llamas. Step, step, step. The rhythm continued, teaching patience and careful attention. Step, step, step. Minor victories persisted. Step, step, step. Balanced loads, smooth navigation of difficult terrain, and successful ceremonial deliveries offered reassurance and pride. Step, step, step. The empire relied on these quiet, repetitive efforts. Step, step, step. Supplies, messages, and sacred items moved reliably, maintained by human endurance and subtle coordination. Step, step, step. Efficiency was uncelebrated but indispensable. Step, step, step. Sleep remained restorative yet functional. Step, step, step. Tambos offered safety, rest, and preparation for continued journeys. Step, step, step. Porters' small rituals and habits reinforced focus and stamina. Step, step, step. Counting, humming, subtle posture shifts. Step, step, step. These quiet behaviors became second nature. Step, step, step. The mountains persisted, indifferent yet shaping the rhythm of human movement. Step, step, step. Porters merged with the landscape, their steps contributing to the silent heartbeat of the empire. Step, step, step. Step, step, step. Step, step, step. Not every day on the road was predictable. Step, step, step. Occasionally, something unusual would happen. A llama might wander off, a bundle of maize might shift oddly, or a sudden gust of wind would challenge balance. Step, step, step. These incidents were minor, quickly absorbed, and rarely dramatic, but they added subtle variation to the endless rhythm. Step, step, step. Some porters developed idiosyncratic routines to cope. One man tapped a staff lightly against stones to maintain rhythm. Step, step, step. Another hummed softly, repeating the same melody across hours of walking. Step, step, step. Small behaviors helped maintain focus, pace, and endurance. Step, step, step. Interactions among porters were quiet but meaningful. Step, step, step. Experienced carriers mentored newcomers, offering advice on posture, load distribution, and timing. Step, step, step. Young porters observed, imitated, and learned, blending their movements seamlessly with the group. Step, step, step. Weather remained an ever-present variable. Step, step, step. Sudden snow or rain could make paths treacherous, requiring subtle adjustments of step and load. Step, step, step. Wind could push against bodies and bundles, forcing small but continuous corrections. Step, step, step. Ceremonial items added invisible tension. Step, step, step. Sacred textiles or offerings demanded care beyond mere balance. Step, step, step. A dropped bundle was a minor omen, requiring extra care on the next leg. Step, step, step. Quipus, too, were delicate. Step, step, step. A tangled or dropped quipu could disrupt records or message flow. Step, step, step. Porters carried both physical and administrative weight. Step, step, step. Tambos remained crucial. Step, step, step. These were not only shelters but hubs of rest, refueling, and adjustment. Step, step, step. Even brief rest was structured. Loads checked, llamas tended, minor repairs done. Step, step, step. Some porters gained local fame. Step, step, step. Tales of a man who could carry extraordinary weight, a woman who navigated dangerous terrain without faltering, or a boy whose step never faltered despite exhaustion. Step, step, step. Stories were whispered, quietly admired, but rarely written. Step, step, step. Food was functional. Step, step, step. Maize, dried potatoes, dried meat. Occasional small treats. Step, step, step. Meals preserved energy for the road. Step, step, step. The rhythm of walking became meditative. Step, step, step. Counting steps, humming, subtle adjustments. Step, step, step. Focus, endurance, and patience fused into habitual action. Step, step, step. Extreme terrain remained ever-present. Step, step, step. Narrow ledges, steep cliffs, icy passes. Step, step, step. Every step demanded vigilance and subtle coordination. Step, step, step. Minor mishaps were quietly instructive. Step, step, step. A shifted load, startled llama, or tripped foot provided subtle lessons in caution and adaptation. Step, step, step. The rhythm continued, experience building slowly. Step, step, step. The empire depended on this quiet labor. Step, step, step. Supplies, messages, and ceremonial items moved reliably through human effort. Step, step, step. Recognition was minimal, but the work was essential. Step, step, step. Communication along the road was subtle. Step, step, step. Whistles, drum signals, and silence transmitted instructions or warnings. Step, step, step. Coordination relied on observation, experience, and intuition. Step, step, step. Porters' lives were unheralded but indispensable. Step, step, step. Their efforts allowed the empire to function seamlessly, a hidden rhythm underlying state efficiency. Step, step, step. Accidents, fatigue, and environmental challenges accumulated. Step, step, step. Yet minor victories persisted, balanced loads, safe passage, successful ceremonial delivery. Step, step, step. Pride, subtle and quiet, marked these accomplishments. Step, step, step. The physical toll was gradual. Step, step, step. Knees and backs bore years of repetitive strain. Step, step, step. Some porters endured into old age, others faltered early. Step, step, step. Sleep and rest remained functional. Step, step, step. Tambos offered shelter, food, and preparation for continuation. Step, step, step. Over time, porters merged with the mountain's rhythm. Step, step, step. Paths, terraces, cliffs, and peaks became second nature. Step, step, step. Experience guided movement more than instructions. Step, step, step. Quirks and routines persisted. Step, step, step. Humming, tapping, subtle postural shifts. Step, step, step. Repetition reinforced endurance, focus, and subtle mastery of movement. Step, step, step. The Andes remained indifferent yet shaped human effort. Step, step, step. Porters' movements sustained the empire silently, rhythmically, without fanfare. Step, step, step. Step, step, step. Step, step, step. As the day wore on, porters approached the final stretches of their journey. Step, step, step. The rhythm had become familiar, almost instinctive. Step, step, step. Every stone, terrace, and switchback was anticipated, each step a practiced habit. Step, step, step. Fatigue accumulated, subtly but relentlessly. Step, step, step. Knees, backs, and shoulders bore the weight of hours, sometimes days, of continuous walking. Step, step, step. Yet experienced porters adjusted instinctively, redistributing loads, altering posture, and maintaining pace. Step, step, step. Weather, ever unpredictable, demanded constant attention. Step, step, step. Winds gusted through mountain passes, rain slicked stone paths, and sun drained energy at high altitudes. Step, step, step. Each step required focus, even when the end of the route seemed near. Step, step, step. Ceremonial items, sacred textiles, and quipus remained sources of quiet tension. Step, step, step. Dropping an item could be a minor omen, a reminder that precision mattered even at the final moments. Step, step, step. Care remained constant. Step, step, step. Tambos along the way provided brief relief. Step, step, step. Porters rested, adjusted loads, and tended llamas. Step, step, step. Meals were functional, sustaining the final effort rather than delighting the senses. Step, step, step. Some porters reflected on the long stretches behind them. Step, step, step. Hours, days, weeks of repetitive motion, each step contributing quietly to the empire's vast machinery. Step, step, step. Recognition was rare, but purpose remained tangible. Step, step, step. Interactions among porters persisted, subtle and understated. Step, step, step. Advice, gentle reminders, and occasional minor encouragements helped maintain rhythm and focus. Step, step, step. Companionship was practical, sustaining morale across harsh terrain. Step, step, step. Llamas, unpredictable yet familiar, continued to require subtle guidance. Step, step, step. Experienced handlers anticipated moods and tendencies, coaxing cooperation with minimal intervention. Step, step, step. Minor mishaps, though rare at the end of a journey, were absorbed quietly. Step, step, step. A slipped foot, a shifted load, or startled animal demanded calm adjustment. Step, step, step. The rhythm persisted. Step, step, step. Porters' personal routines endured. Step counting, humming, subtle posture adjustments, and load shifts provided continuity and maintained focus. Step, step, step. Repetition reinforced both endurance and confidence. Step, step, step. The final stretches often carried a sense of quiet satisfaction. Step, step, step. Balanced loads, smooth passage across difficult terrain, and the successful delivery of items offered minor but meaningful triumphs. Step, step, step. Cumulative fatigue-shaped reflection. Step, step, step. Years of repetitive motion, exposure to extreme terrain, and meticulous attention had honed bodies and minds. Step, step, step. The quiet mastery of movement, rhythm, and endurance was evident in each step. Step, step, step. Even at the journey's end, attention remained constant. Step, step, step. Terrain, animals, and loads demanded focus. Step, step, step. Experience guided instinctively, maintaining the empire's silent efficiency. Step, step, step. Communication remained understated. Step, step, step. Whistles, signals, and gestures coordinated movements, warned of hazards, or signaled rest. Step, step, step. Observation, intuition, and rhythm ensured seamless interaction. Step, step, step. Sleep, rest, and food punctuated these final efforts. Step, step, step. Functional meals, brief naps, and secure tambos preserved energy. Step, step, step. Preparation for continuation remained methodical and disciplined. Step, step, step. The mountains, indifferent yet constant, shaped every motion. Step, step, step. Porters merged with the landscape, their labor invisible yet essential to the empire's function. Step, step, step. Each footfall part of a greater rhythm. Step, step, step. Minor quirks and rituals persisted to the end. Step, step, step. Humming, tapping, shifting loads. Step, step, step. Repetition reinforced endurance, focus, and subtle mastery. Step, step, step. Recognition remained quiet, almost non-existent. Step, step, step. Yet the empire relied on every step, every careful adjustment, every measured rhythm. Step, step, step. Efficiency persisted, maintained by human diligence and experience. Step, step, step.